Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
Hello, welcome to our Bible study. My name is Clint McElroy, and today we'll be in 1 Kings chapter 11. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. We'll also be meeting at 9 a.m. for classes, so please join us for those as well. You're also welcome to join us at 9 a.m. for this class in the auditorium. We want everyone to remember we have these English Standard Version Bibles available from the World Bible School. If you care to have one, please contact our church office and we'll make arrangements to get you one. Our sick list is very long, so please refer to our bulletin, which is available in the foyer, for information about those who need your prayers. As is our custom, we want to remember the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus who were joined by a third man on their way. When they got to their destination, that third man revealed himself to be the Christ, risen from the dead, and quickly left their company. In his absence, the two men remarked to each other that there had been a burning in their hearts while he was with them. It's that burning that they had in their hearts that we hope to kindle in our own hearts as we draw closer to the Lord through a study of His Word. We also want to remember the admonitions of Leviticus chapter 19 to be holy, for the Lord our God is holy. And we want to remember the stories of Jeroboam and Rehoboam and the prophet that came to Jeroboam. These stories will be reviewed in short order in coming weeks, so we won't go into the details now. But of significance to me is the story of the prophet that came to Jeroboam, who told him all that he was doing that was wrong and incorrect according to the word of the Lord, and was on his way home, having done all those things that the Lord had asked him to do, except to finally just to return home. And as he was going home, he was met on the way by another prophet from Israel. And that prophet told the first prophet that the Lord told him that he should come and have a meal with him. This was a lie, but it sounded good to the first prophet, so he went and had a meal with him. And believing that lie cost him his life. He was killed on the way home from that meeting with that second prophet. It's a terrible story about what God expects us to do. We've been given His Word, and it's our responsibility to understand it and to use it to recognize when those false prophets come into our lives and tell us to do things that are against God's will. And that story is very telling in today's material, and of course we will be talking about it in great detail as we go into this study of 1 Kings chapter 11. I do want to point out that we will be lacking in a detailed discussion today because the chapter is very long, and I think just in the reading of it will consume most of the time that we have available. So we'll do a discussion of a review of 1 Kings chapter 10, which we studied last time several months ago, and go into the details of chapter 11 in the next lesson, which will bridge us on into the story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Where we go from there is yet to be determined. I've come to the conclusion through several months of delays and obstacles that we must be doing the right thing because the devil seems to be standing in the way of me preparing these lessons. But there may be a more beneficial study to engage in at this point rather than continuing into a study of the Kings, which we've had some from Scott over the past year. He has delved into some of the stories of the Kings in sufficient detail that it may be too soon to go on into a continued review of their stories as I had planned. So we may look at going into one of the Gospels or going into one of the letters of the New Testament as an alternative for the coming months, and then at some point in the future, we'll return to a study of the Kings and wrap up the study of the Kings between the time of Jeroboam and Rehoboam and the time of the final captivity. We'll give it some consideration over the coming weeks. We have many lessons to go, several, at least 3, before we'll wrap up, and then we'll consider what we'll do at that point. So I hope you'll join me now as we enter into this study of 1 Kings chapter 11, which correlates in very small part to 2 Chronicles chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 11 from the English Standard Version. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. Verse 3. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Verse 6. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem, and so did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. Verse 9. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept the covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and will give it to your servant. Verse 12. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son, for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. Verse 14. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house in Edom. For when David was in Edom, and Joab the commander of the army went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months, until he had cut off every male in Edom. Verse 17. But Hadad fled to Egypt, together with certain Edomites of his father's servants, Hadad still being a little child. They set out from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage to the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tahpenes the queen. Verse 20. And the sister of Tahpenes bore him Genubath his son, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab the commander of the army was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, Let me depart, that I may go to my own country. But Pharaoh said to him, What have you lacked with me, that you are now seeking to go to your own country? And he said to him, Only let me depart. Verse 23. God also raised up as an adversary to him Rezin the son of Eliada, who had fled from his master Hadadezer, king of Zobah. And he gathered men about him and became leader of a marauding band after the killing by David. And they went to Damascus and lived there and made him king in Damascus. He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, doing harm as Hadad did, and he loathed Israel and reigned over Syria. Verse 26. Jeroboam the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. And this was the reason why he lifted up his hand against the king, Solomon built the Millo and closed up the breach of the city of David his father. The man Jeroboam was very able, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. Verse 29. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him on the road. Now Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them were alone in the open country. Then Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him, and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. Verse 32. But he shall have 1 tribe, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David his father did. Verse 34. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and will give it to you, 10 tribes. Yet to his son I will give 1 tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to put my name. Verse 37. And I will take you, and you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you shall be king over Israel. And if you will listen to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you, and will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you, and I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. Verse 40. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, to Shishak king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Verse 41. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, and all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. Okay, so that's a very long reading, very complicated story there about the turn of Solomon from the Lord, and the adversaries that are raised up against Solomon as kind of a punishment against him, perhaps even a warning, so that he might have turned from his ways. I don't really understand that too well. It seems like the Lord, having left Solomon to his own devices after appearing to him twice, had an expectation of obedience, and that, again, is very troubling. And Solomon, instead of obeying the Lord, let his eye wander to these women who came from these foreign countries. And that's the practice of royalty, to marry into relationships with foreign kings so they can avoid war and build relationships to improve the circumstance of each kingdom. But the Lord clearly didn't want Solomon to do that, and having done this, the Lord brought this judgment against him. And immediately these adversaries are raised up and lead lives in such a way that they're notable before they're even adversaries, and then come and present themselves as problems for Israel to deal with. And we don't hear much about the problems themselves, but this backstory on Hadad, and specifically, is so similar to Moses as to be almost identical. And then we see this story of Rezin, the son of Eliada. This again is another story of a warrior king marauder, very similar to David. And there's it's not lost on the hearer, I believe, that these similarities are there. I think that's kind of why these stories are presented. And then Jeroboam is brought up, and of course Jeroboam is the one we've been talking about so many times as the preamble to our studies. Jeroboam's story, and this is the first part of it, is a story of a promise. This promise that he gives Jeroboam is very similar to the one that David received from the Lord, and certainly the one Solomon received. And it was simply that if he would obey the instructions and the commandments of the Lord, he would be blessed. And what a tremendous blessing to have from the Lord. Of all men, David, Solomon, and now Jeroboam, and I guess even Saul had received this blessing. So we see this judgment befall Solomon. And one of the reasons why I haven't done this lesson in a couple of months is, of course, the length of this passage is very long, but it's a very troubling passage. This story challenges our notions of what success in life are. It challenges our notion of what acceptable behavior of those in authority are. It challenges pretty much everything that men set up their understanding around. And it is very troubling because the similarities and what we see in the life of Solomon to what's going on in the world today are not lost on me. Certainly, the practices of worshiping these gods are very similar to what the world engages in today without necessarily recognizing any deity. Sexual immorality and the practices of dealing with unwanted pregnancies and all the other things that result from their lifestyles were all part of these religions and the practices that are being practiced here. And Solomon embraced these women because they were beautiful and he wanted to have them in his life. And he didn't consider the ramifications to Israel if he chose to disobey the Lord. What would happen to those things for which he was charged with responsibility? These things are troubling to me. The parallels here between what he did and what's going on in our world today, I just can't underestimate. And we'll, of course, talk about this more next time, but it harkens back to some of the other things that have been going on and part of the study in John that we've been playing, and touch on this point of our perception of what is glorious. In God's eyes, any success that leads us from the path of obedience is not glorious. It's an abomination. It's exactly what we should not be engaged in. What God considers glorious is obedience, and obedience at whatever cost is required of us to be obedient. And that's a very difficult thing to accommodate. Obviously, Solomon, the most blessed of men, there's not another kingdom as blessed as Solomon's. Everything that's talked about in later chapters is in relation to how great Solomon's kingdom was. And so Solomon lived as blessed a life in our view of blessing and success as anyone could have lived it, and he fell short because he turned his eyes from the Lord and sought his own understanding and his own desires rather than the will of the Lord through obedience. And that is a terrible thing to understand the significance of, what it cost Israel and ultimately cost the people of Israel countless lives, countless heartaches through the disobedience of other kings that would come, wars between Israel and Judah. It's just terrible, the things that happened as a result. The false religion that was set up by Jeroboam is a terrible thing that had costs that are, how do we even estimate the costs of that? We don't know what level of offense the Lord took from people worshiping in the high places rather than going to Jerusalem. I would wager that it was significant. So this is a terrible warning about our circumstance in the world today. We live in a nation that's been blessed beyond any historical parallel, perhaps even Solomon's time. We live in a wealthy nation of people blessed above all others in the world, and we chose to serve ourselves and serve evil desires and not recognize the Lord's hand in our success and the blessings that we've received from Him. And do you think that's going to go? without ramifications? Do you think we'll be able to continue forward in these blessings from the Lord without acknowledging and thanksgiving His wonderful bounty that's been extended toward us? How can we have in our minds that we can be ungrateful and still receive this? There's a reckoning coming, and it's coming because we've turned from the Lord. We, all of us, have turned from the Lord. Not just our leaders, because in this nation, we are in charge. The people, when we're charged with the responsibility of directing our paths, and when we chose to leave the Lord and follow our own desires and our own will, and to accommodate false gods among our people, to lead us away and distract us, and to teach our children that it's okay to murder, that it's okay to do evil toward our fellow man if it serves some political purpose. These things are not acceptable, and they're not acceptable before the Lord, and it doesn't take a lot of examination of the Lord's word to understand that. These things are not going to stand before the Lord, and certainly not in His name. So that's why I've put off this study. I didn't want to be a downer through the last part of last year, which had its own issues. But I'm very concerned about our way of life in this nation and the expectation of people that we will continue to be blessed when we turn from the Lord. That's not the way history has shown anything to work. And when there are blessings for people who have turned from the Lord, it is not good for them. The things that they live through are terrible. And throughout the world, we know history from other places that also indicates that those great kingdoms throughout the world were very oppressive and destructive to the people. The wealthy leaders lived well, but everybody else suffered. That's not our circumstance in this country, and we should be grateful. We should be coming to the Lord in thanksgiving every opportunity we have to thank the Lord for the blessings He's given us, for the sacrifices that so many that went before us made in order to secure these things. And these things are all temporal. They have no significance in eternity. So the Lord's desire for us to benefit from these things in a temporal existence is not something that really exists. The Lord is glorified if we live in suffering or if we live in blessed lives. If we bring glory to Him and honor to Him and praise Him, He's glorified. So we have no guarantee of this circumstance that we find ourselves in, is what I'm saying. And if you think we can continue in this blessing from the Lord without being thankful for it, this chapter should be a warning against us, because we know what happens in the next chapter, and the chapters that follow are not good things that ultimately culminate in the people being taken into captivity. Many of them were lost, and others were taken into captivity. And those were not good things for the people to experience. It all worked out for the good of the Lord, and all things will work out for the good of the Lord. But it doesn't necessarily work out for us and our way of thinking to be good experiences. So, remember the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. Be thankful for your circumstance. Look forward to serving the Lord in the coming year. Find ways to serve the Lord in the coming year. Do not neglect this great blessing and the opportunity of thanksgiving that we have afforded to us. We are blessed above all people that I can find any evidence of, and I am thankful, and I hope that you will be as well. Hope you found a word of encouragement in today's lesson. We will continue, hopefully, God willing, to study next time in a detailed review of chapters 10 and 11. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m. Hope to see you there. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. God bless. Have a great week.